Matt Robeson, Beyond Politics, and today, inside the incredible meeting where the head of the Social Security Administration admitted that Donald Trump might make the entire system collapse. This is one of those things, one of those moments where you could look back potentially and see that this is where the bottom fell out and that something truly bad was about to happen. It's like your boss says, we need to talk immediately. You come home unexpectedly and you find 2 wine glasses in the sink. The kind of moment where maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's a sea change. That's what it feels like reading the reporting from ProPublica journalist Eli Hager about the secret recording that he got a hold of. His article on ProPublica has the unassuming title, "The President Wanted It and I Did It. Recording Reveals Head of Social Security Thoughts on Doge and Trump." But when you read it, it goes a lot deeper. You have the acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration expressing concern that the entire system might collapse under the weight of what Donald Trump is doing. He says that if the kind of cuts that have been applied at USAID are attempted at Social Security, it would be, quote, catastrophic for the people in our country. And he asks rhetorically, are we going to break something? And answers, I don't know. Social Security is arguably the most popular and effective program that America runs. It serves 73 million Americans, and it lifts nearly 22 million of them out of poverty each year. 16 million of them are seniors, but another 1 million of them are children. It's the most effective anti-poverty program in the United States, and it occupies a unique place in American history. Old age used to be a source of terror for Americans before Social Security was created 80 years ago. It's fundamentally changed our society and what it's like to live through the life cycle as an American. Now, it's long been known as the third rail of politics, and Donald Trump is a savvy enough politician to know that he shouldn't mess around with it. That's why he went from calling it a Ponzi scheme a quarter century ago to pledging not to touch it in his political campaigns. But maybe the most extraordinary thing on this recording is the admission that the White House is actively directing the substantial cuts and major interference going on inside the Social Security Administration that are already creating chaos and confusion and that are already directly affecting your benefits. Make no mistake, I want to be crystal clear about this. Donald Trump is already negatively affecting your Social Security benefits or the Social Security of someone you know. And he's making the future of the entire program highly uncertain, or as the acting commissioner put it, subject to collapse. My guest today is ProPublica journalist Eli Hager, and this is our conversation about what he uncovered when he got a hold of the secret tape inside a top-level meeting at the Social Security Administration. So you got a hold of this recording of an extraordinary meeting with the head of Social Security. Take us inside the room. What was this meeting?
There was a meeting that's actually happened on a monthly basis, I believe, for a long time at the Social Security Administration, in which the Social Security Commissioner convenes a small select group of Social Security advocates and senior staff to just talk about issues and bounce things off each other. It's always been closed to the public. It's always been private. But in this particular meeting, which was held in a conference room in DC, pretty nondescript, seemed like nothing was going to happen. The commissioner said an awful lot about what was happening with Social Security.
Tell us a little bit about this commissioner, Leland Dudick, a name that I definitely wish I had made up, but I didn't. He's about to say a bunch of things that are very troubling about what's happening at Social Security, but he's not exactly like some lefty progressive anti-MAGA type.
No, quite the opposite. He's had quite a few months, to be honest with you. So for 25 years, he's been a federal bureaucrat at a couple of other agencies, but mostly at the Social Security Administration. He focused on cybersecurity and information technology types of stuff. Kind of mid-level guy, was not a manager. But then in possibly late January, but certainly early February, he started feeding information to Doge as Doge set its sights on Social Security. He admitted in a LinkedIn post that he has since deleted that he was going around the chain of command and mailing documents to himself and providing sensitive Social Security information to Doge. And for that, he was actually placed on leave briefly, and it looked like he might get fired, but instead President Trump swooped in and kind of saved him from that fate and elevated him all the way to commissioner. So he's in this position that nobody would have expected him to be in. Most of the staff I've talked to, and ProPublica has talked to 35 or 40 Social Security staff in the last week or so, just didn't know who he was at all before this. So he's in this position now of running this meeting that we were talking about for the first time, interacting with these people for the first time as commissioner. And he's a little bit more honest than you would expect. But no, he's certainly not some radical. In fact, he was working with Doge initially.
So just so I am following this right, he's kind of a mid-level IT guy. He's sort of federal government tech support. And he's briefly in trouble for kind of working with Doge, breaking the rules. And instead of getting fired, he gets promoted because this is what Trump is looking for. A mid-level guy who has no particular expertise in Social Security. He's a computer guy. Suddenly, he's in the top job.
Well, he does have expertise on some of the Social Security systems and the databases and how those work. And he's also, part of his portfolio was looking for fraud. And so he does have some expertise on those areas, but he admits himself he's not a expert on, first of all, disability, which is a huge thing that Social Security handles. And he's not an expert on beneficiaries. So what people need from the agency, what people receiving Social Security need. And he's not a manager. He has not had significant management experience. So that plays a role as well.
That makes him a perfect candidate to be a cabinet official under Donald Trump. So, all right, we have to get to the recording. There were a number of quotes in your ProPublica article that were really kind of showstoppers for me. And it's honestly a dilemma. Which one should we put into the title for this episode? But tell me, as you got your hands on this recording, which I do want to ask you about, what stood out to you? Was there a moment where you said, hold on, I got to hit rewind. I got to make sure that I got that quote right?
Yeah, several times. I mean, it's a 2-hour recording. Commissioner Dudick was only supposed to speak for 15 minutes, according to a copy of the agenda, but he ended up speaking for over an hour. And I would say that during that hour, he said several things that made me, stop and rewind. It's just not how you hear top federal officials speak, not with that level of honesty. Honestly, you don't usually hear that level of candor. And so I would say the 3 buckets of things that he said very explicitly and honestly that I was struck by are, number one, the precarity of Social Security right now. He talked about with great honesty. So some of the quotes that we include in our article are that he said, I don't want the system to collapse, which is, he could have said the system's not going to collapse in talking to the room full of people, but he said, I don't want it to collapse. He also said it would be catastrophic. He really emphasized that word catastrophic if what happened at, for example, USAID and some of these other federal agencies were to happen at Social Security. And then he said, are we going to break something? I don't know. So just not leaving a lot of confidence in the future of Social Security with those comments. And the second bucket was comments he made directly tying his decisions to the President Trump. It's not just that Doge is in there doing these things at Social Security. He repeatedly throughout this hour said, I've had long conversations with the White House. I've been making decisions I don't want to make, but it's because the White House wants me to. It's the president's agenda. The president wanted me to do this. The president has me doing this. So he kept saying the president and the White House. And so I thought that was interesting because the narrative so far has been that Doge is a little bit of this rogue team in these agencies doing its thing. But this made it sound like President Trump and the White House were very hands-on at the Social Security Administration with the layoffs and reductions in the workforce and the closure of offices and all these things that are ultimately going to affect Social Security beneficiaries.
So to read that back, you listened to this entire 2-hour recording and you're really able to connect the dots between this is Donald Trump putting pressure on the Social Security Administration to do a number of things. And the end result is that the commissioner, the head of the Social Security Administration, is currently concerned that the system could collapse. And he thinks that they could break something, and he's just not sure whether or not that's going to happen.
Right. And one thing that was interesting about the recording is kind of we mentioned this in the ProPublica article, the kind of informal discursive manner that he said a couple of these things. I think maybe it stems from his having been a more mid-level person and now having to speak in this role of the leader of the agency. But he was saying these things that were quite alarming, but then he would kind of move on to the next thing and not linger on it. And the tone was a little bit milder than you would think. So it left a lot of the people we spoke with a number of the people that were attending the meeting either in person or virtually. And they were just kind of baffled. Is he really saying that? Or what does this mean for the future of Social Security, which 73 million Americans rely on?
It's really something that I think you can only get from the tenor of actually listening to it and talking to the people involved. But it's a subtle point, but it's an important one that he is very casually throwing out the idea that the system could collapse. So I just want to pause on that for a second, that this is very real. This is not, there's sort of a tenor of coverage of what's going on under Donald Trump that leads a little bit to outrage porn. I can't believe this. I can't believe the threat of this. This is, in your very sober analysis and just straight up reporting, this is very real people in the room saying, yes, this is casually being discussed, that the entire Social Security system could collapse.
Well, right. And the previous commissioner, Martin O'Malley, has repeatedly said that he believes system collapse for Social Security will occur within the next 30 to 90 days. Now, I don't know how Martin O'Malley is coming up with that time frame, to be honest with you, but he's out there saying that, and he's in a position to know. I mean, certainly if you continue with these, they want to reduce the workforce by around 7,000 employees, which is an awful lot of people. And the agency was already severely backlogged in terms of responding to the phone lines. Field offices didn't have enough staff to respond to the needs of the elderly and disabled people who come into field offices needing service. The delays on getting a hearing, if you have a Social Security appeal, were already well over a year. And so if you continue to cut into the staff and into the number of offices that are around the country, I mean, the effect on service is going to be quite dramatic. That much is clear to me. There's already been some significant changes in the metrics on service over just the last month for the worse. And so it's clear to me that those things will happen. Now, whether the way that they're toying with the code, and I think they're looking for fraud in the database and they're messing with the code a little bit, and it's built on this very old system using an old computer programming language. And if they mess something up, whether that would affect benefits going out on time every time, which Social Security is very proud of, by the way, that they always pay on time every time. It's possible. I think that's what he's saying. I don't know. Could we break something? I don't know.
There's something very Donald Rumsfeldian about what you just laid out. There are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. So you're saying that we know right now that they're planning to cut 7,000 employees from the Social Security Administration out of an entire staff of 57,000. They have offered an early retirement or buyout to all 57,000. And they're making cuts to disability determination services. They are getting rid of the team that had been trying to improve the interface on the website. They're making changes that are having real effects already. So those are kind of the known knowns. But beyond that, there are things we just don't know and can't know about what they're doing as they muck around with the code, and a code that is the expertise to deal with it and fix it is very limited because it's an old code. And it seems like we're way down in the weeds on this, but we're not. I mean, the upshot is they are mucking around with a system that is kind of delicate to begin with, and that millions and millions of Americans rely on every single week. And we're entering the danger zone.
And very vulnerable people in a lot of cases. There are some people with severe physical and intellectual disabilities that rely on Social Security and really can't leave the house, or it's for a lot of people, it's their only source of income, or people who have paid into the system their whole life and they're now very low income older people, and this is their money. They paid into it and they rely on that payment coming in on a regular basis, or else they can't pay rent or put food on the table. So the consequences are quite severe if that were to happen. I think what we don't know is whether they want to do anything to benefits, because Donald Trump repeatedly on the campaign trail said, we're not going to touch your Social Security benefits. But what's clear is they're affecting service. They're definitely affecting service by laying people off and closing offices. that type of service that a lot of older folks and people with, including with intellectual disabilities, rely on, who can't just go do everything on the internet. They rely on that in-person service or reaching somebody on the phone. That's definitely going to be affected.
One of the things I really appreciated about your reporting here is that because there are these gaps, there are these unknown unknowns, you really tried to fill it in with good old-fashioned journalism and interviews. And you have a line in this article, which I really do commend to everyone. And if you're looking to Google it, I'll just pull it up here. The title on ProPublica is "The President Wanted It, and I Did It. Recording reveals head of Social Security's thoughts on Doge and Trump." You have a line in here where you interviewed five employees. You interviewed many more employees than that. You interviewed five employees who said that tech systems seem to be crashing nearly every day, leading to more delays in serving beneficiaries. This was already a problem, but they said it's gotten much worse, not the norm. So you're kind of filling in that gap of there are these things happening. The breakdowns are starting to cascade.
Yes, they definitely are. And it's all these little ways too. Like even that email that federal employees were supposed to send saying 5 things that they did last week. At Social Security, that has continued. So they have to do that every week. And that's time that they're spending not getting to the backlog of cases, right? So, and then they're worried about their job. Should I take this buyout? This is all time that they're not spending on their caseload. But with the IT stuff in particular, Doge canceled or scaled back several IT contracts, and now multiple employees are telling me that their email systems and their interface where they work on cases just is crashing on a near daily basis. And it boots back up, but this is all just time cutting. These backlogs increasing, the wait times increasing for people who rely on these benefits. And other little things too, like Doge put a $1 limit on purchases that employees can make with their government purchase cards. So if they need more paper and printer ink, for the paperwork that Social Security field offices do a lot of, they can't buy more than $1 worth of that, and paying phone bills and buying original documents like birth certificates and marriage and divorce certifications. All this stuff is necessary for applying for various types of Social Security, and they're not able to do it. So it's just like this cascade of small things that are really affecting service, even if Trump can continue to say, I'm not cutting your benefit amount.
I think it's so important what you just said. There's such a tendency when we talk about big government programs, or really any kind of program, to think in big sweeping terms, billions of dollars. It's sort of the Washingtonese that all of us are inculcated in when we talk about policy and politics. But one of the things that I learned so well it was a grad school course on policymaking was you really have to play the movie, because people like to say the devil's in the details. The angel is in the details. It is the details when you really play the movie of how are we going to do things? How are we going to deliver programs? How are we going to make systems work? You have to understand deep down in the weeds, the step by step. And I'll give a very mundane example. When I started as a chief of staff in 2007 for a relatively new office on Capitol Hill, I was brought in after the office had been in operation for 6 months. And I discovered that there was a massive backlog of responding to constituent letters and casework. And it wasn't necessarily the staffers' fault. It's that they hadn't really been told by someone who had experience with doing this how to do these things, how to answer letters, how to respond to casework, how to play the movie and do the step by step. And it took us months to clean all of that up. And you're talking about one congressional district, thousands of people that you're dealing with, not millions and millions of people across a staff of 57,000 who are trying to respond to all of their needs. So I can just imagine the degree to which these little things, you can't make small purchases, you can't replenish paper ink, you can't buy needed documents. All of these things really do accrete to create massive problems, and they start to build up over time. As you're interviewing people at Social Security, what's sort of the tenor of what they're describing to you? Are they feeling like they're kind of running up against this like death by 1,000 cuts That's really on the nose. Death by a thousand cuts kind of interference in their day-to-day work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would describe it as pandemonium, honestly. Like most Social Security staff that I've talked to, they just don't know what's going to happen next. People are extrapolating, and there's a little bit of hyperbole, but that's natural when you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with your job or with the people that you serve. First, there was a rumor going around for a while that they were going to try to cut the Social Security workforce by 50%. Social Security Administration has since denied that. They've said we're trying to cut 7,000 people. The deadline is actually today for people to take the buyout. So we'll see how many people take the buyouts or early retirement. But then there's all this back and forth. Commissioner Dudick will announce something, and then 2 days later he'll rescind it. And so there's a lot of confusion, I guess I would say, and people are confused about where they're going to be literally in a week or two from now, because are they going to have to return to an office because of the back to work order? But then they're closing 6 out of the 10 regional offices. So if I'm in one of those regions that they just closed the office, does that mean that my commute will now be like 3 hours each way or something? It's effectively pushing people out just by making work life intolerable for them, their commute intolerable, and offices that are closing and will become extremely overcrowded if everybody from across these consolidated regions were to come into them. So yeah, it's just a lot of chaos and confusion. People are very scared for their jobs, scared to speak with the media, but most of all, scared for what will happen to the people they serve. Because I think a lot of people at Social Security Administration really have a public service orientation and want to serve beneficiaries.
You said before that one of the things that emerged from this recording was it really pierced through the veil, the excuse that it's all Doge, it's all Elon Musk, that this is direct evidence that no, Leland Dudick is talking to Donald Trump, and everything that's happening is what Trump wants. And you have this extraordinary quote in there where it makes it sound like Dudick is not really on board with all of this, that he's kind of trying to set Trump straight, but he can't. And he says, do you know what it's like dealing with a manic depressive? Is he referring to Donald Trump?
So in the recording, and I should be clear, Commissioner Dudick, he repeatedly throughout the recording says, I've had multiple conversations with the White House. And then he also says, this is the president's agenda. So neither one of those necessarily is explicitly saying that he spoke directly with President Trump. So I should clarify that. But in that specific exchange, there was somebody in the room was saying, why don't you more forcefully call out these allegations of widespread Social Security fraud that President Trump has been amplifying, most recently at that speech to Congress, where he went on some great length saying that they were alleging that there were probably millions of dead people over the age of 110 who were receiving Social Security benefits, which is flatly not true. And so somebody in the room was asking Commissioner Dudick, why don't you refute that? And that person who was asking the question was talking about President Trump, was saying, President Trump is saying this, why don't you refute that? And then Commissioner Dudick's answer was, we did put the real numbers on our website. This is like dealing with somebody who's manic depressive. So it very much seems that because he's answering a question about President Trump, that he's talking about President Trump, but it's possible that he thinks that he's saying this whole situation is like dealing with somebody who's manic depressive, getting these orders from the White House and from Doge, but then some of them are taken back, and it's confusing trying to operationalize these things that he's being told to do.
Just to be clear, the AP and you in your story here do set the record straight on the amount of Social Security fraud that's going on, and Trump's claims that there are 300-year-old people receiving benefits. Elon Musk's claims that there are vampires receiving benefits. Just to be clear, is any of that true?
So there are some cases of Social Security fraud, right?
It's non-zero.
It would be possible to bury grandma in the backyard and continue collecting the check for some amount of time. But Social Security actually has a lot of processes in place to try to prevent that. They have whole fraud teams, but also most importantly, they have a very quick and effective death reporting system. So as soon as a family comes into a funeral home, the death of that person is reported immediately through a contract with the Social Security Administration, and that person is immediately taken off of benefits. So anytime a death happens in the normal way and somebody's not surreptitiously buried, the Social Security Administration is going to know about it, and they stop the benefits. Now, in one of the databases that DOGE has been looking at, they keep some of the people in the database, but then they're not in pay status. They're not being paid anymore. So DOGE is correct that there's some 150-year-old people in that database, but what they seem to have missed, either by accident or they're just intentionally misinforming people, is that those people aren't being paid. They exist in Social Security's information there, but they're not being paid. And Commissioner Dudick emphasized that again in his remarks.
I want to get to a portion of this where it's necessarily going to call for a little bit of speculation, a little bit of interpolation on your part. And I want to be cautious about this because you're very careful to stick to the reporting, to stick to the facts. So I don't want to overstretch you. But I feel obligated to ask, first of all, you got your hands on this recording. I'm not going to push you on sources and methods. Clearly, it was a recording that was not meant to be public, and yet it's a recording, as you were pointing out to me as we were chatting before this, it's a recording of a meeting that involves quite a number of people, and Commissioner Dudick is making quite a number of extraordinary comments and claims in here. What do you think could have been going through his mind in terms of, did he expect that none of this would become public? Did he, in his kind of discursive and dismissive delivery of some of these really cataclysmic, potentially, claims about what could happen to Social Security, was he potentially unaware of just how big his statements were?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just what happens when you put people who aren't ready for a role into that role. I mean, and we see that in leadership position, in a couple of leadership positions across the Trump administration. If you have people who are experienced in management and in having a meeting like this, they might not say those things. So that, I think that's just part of it. I think also that he was trying to kind of have it both ways, in terms of, there were some people in the room who were kind of Social Security advocates who were, and tuning in through Microsoft Teams, who they're speaking for the vulnerable, people with disabilities and lower income older folks, and are very concerned about what's happening. And he was trying to kind of share their concerns, but also do this thing of defending DOGE a little bit and saying, give DOGE a chance. So he was trying to strike this weird tone where he was doing both things at once. And that led to some of the scary statements being delivered in this oddly informal way. I'm not inside his head, but yeah, they just have the recording.
So here's the second one that if we were doing some kind of a courtroom procedural on TV, you might raise to the judge, wait, calls for speculation, I object, but let's ask anyway. How much trouble is Social Security really in under Donald Trump?
I mean, if you go back, so Donald Trump you've probably heard him say a million times, I'm not going to touch Social Security. That's obviously not true. I mean, it's being touched. If you go back in a 2000 book that he wrote, he said he called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. He called for raising the retirement age. He also, in his first term as president, every single year in his budgets that he proposed, there were cuts to Social Security. So this idea that he's some consistent protector of Social Security is just not true. That being said, I think he does understand politics pretty well, and he understands that Social Security is the most popular social program in the United States, and it serves 73 million people, as I said. So he's aware that if you started literally cutting benefits, especially for the old age program, which is the Social Security that most people think about, as opposed to disability and survivor benefits and other programs that the Social Security Administration runs. If you start actually cutting those benefits, there might be people out in the street with pitchforks, but Doge already is doing all of these more insidious things to affect service delivery. And I think that's really where the story is. You simultaneously undermine confidence in the program by throwing out all these claims of fraud, which is kind of similar to how welfare was undermined with the talk of welfare fraud and welfare queen. So you undermine confidence in the program, then you make it an even more inefficient program by laying off staff and increasing wait times. And then that popularity of the program starts to go down. I mean, I can see that sequence of events happening for sure. But so far, there's no indication that they're going to be cutting benefits. But your ability to get service from somebody at the Social Security Administration is already being affected.
Eli Hager, it's an extraordinary piece of reporting. It's a real public service that you and ProPublica are providing here by giving us this window into what's going on at the very top level of the Social Security Administration and the White House. And thank you for being on Beyond Politics.
Thanks for having me.